me clothes, give me love, and give me shelter, shelter. Simple life, it's all we want to live. Give me food, give me clothes, give me love, and give me shelter, shelter. Yeah.
So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the We Too All Others Movement podcast or platform. And they say the platform that speaks to and for the masses. We're not in the business of manufacturing players, pimps and hustlers, we say, but we're in the business of changing and revolutionizing the thought process of our people, not only in Liberia, but even around the world. Again, we say welcome back to the We Too Movement podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Ayiti Williams. And tonight we are diving into a conversation I think a lot of us wrestle with, whether we realize it or not, the difference between morality and ethics. That's our topic for tonight. And so to go right ahead, I'd like in the first place to welcome to the show Mr. Gebah Kamara, who is going to take this ride with us. Welcome on board, Gebah.
Hey, Ayiti, welcome again. Excited to be here as always. As we keep driving home, very perspective about issue that confront us as African, and particularly us as Liberian, as we dive into this interconnected world between the modern world, or what we call modernity, or the Western world, versus African, perspective, or African culture. And it's a lot to untangle, So thanks again for welcoming me, and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, so why it matters to us? This particular topic title, the difference between morality and ethics. And as you can see on screen, they say untangling the it's pretty clear cut. As you can see, untangling the code we live by in a conflicting world. So again, I'm happy to have with me here today, Mr. Gebah Kamara. One thing, in our modern world, as we can see, where globalization, like you just said, Western ideology often overshadowing indigenous tradition. Mm-hmm. We see it has become a little bit more imperative to sometimes pause and reflect on the value that once anchored our societies. So as we navigate this particular complex terrain, I think it's often important that we ask ourselves, what does it really mean to be moral, and what does it mean to be ethical? And so it is on this basis that we thought that we kind of sit down to begin this dialogue, because I know for a fact, what one person may see or one culture may see as ethical or moral may not be actually seen as moral or ethical by another person.
Yeah.
So do they just sound different? Could be a question. Or are we talking about two different compasses that shape the way we live? So that's why we have with us here Mr. Gebah, who is going to try to dissect this thing. So again, thank you very much, Gebah, for coming. I've been looking forward to this particular conversation. In fact, today I had a conversation while I was driving home with a friend of mine. I think it's one of those topics that touches every part of our life. So to begin with, I'd like to ask you, what do you think, how would you differentiate what's the difference between morality and ethics from your own layman perspective?
Well, to be honest, I would tell you I'm not, an expert in morality and ethics, but just, being an educated man and understanding, the dynamic between the two culture, having the opportunity to privilege live in both worlds, understand the Western, view and Western societal view when it comes to what is active, what is moral, and also having the privilege to be born in Africa and raised and understanding, the moral and ethical, concern of those society. I feel like, I do have, some words or so to share, right? So a clean disclaimer right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, for me, being moral means adhering to, personal or communal sense of right and wrong. While being ethical referred to, following societal, rules or codes of conduct that guide behaviors,
Right.
In the African context, morality often emphasizes communal well-being, together, societal responsibility and respect for order, while ethics can encompass both individual character, and adherence to societal norm. So it's good to kind of like, differentiate both, moral and ethic. So morality, refer to personal or community-based understanding of right and wrong. Morality, again, refer to personal uh, or community-based understanding of right and wrong. It guides individual action based on a sense of what is good or bad. And ethics, refer to a set of rules or principles, that dictates how individual should behave in a particular, context, right? It could
Right.
be maybe often in a professional or societal setting. It can also be used to describe, moral and character, in or for moral and character of a person or behavior. So I think the distinction between those two is good to, kind of understand as we dive into it, because that's where the conflict comes between, what is moral and what is ethical. Ethical often kind of it kind of rhyme into what is perceived as moral, and what is ethical can sometimes look like also morality. So yeah, just to kind of start, set us up with those understanding.
So I really do appreciate your response and your the the I mean you kind of give a clear, because I too went ahead, I did some type of research, because I was, as I spoke to my friend today, an associate of mine, and what his perspective was, that topic is pretty broad, because
Hmm.
what one society may term as moral may not be moral for another society,
Yeah.
and then we took it a step forward to talk about ethics, which of course, just like you alluded to,
Hmm.
ethics on the other hand pertains to rule provided by external sources such as, most like you said,
Hmm.
codes of conduct in workplaces,
Hmm.
this, that. And we can even
Hmm.
take a step further by trying to narrow it to specific discipline. For example, what is, because if we now just take it to ethics, what is ethics in law? What is ethics in medicine? What is
Hmm.
ethics? And so those different discipline.
Yeah.
But the mission of this platform is to educate, to cultivate, and to
Yeah.
empower. So I want us to really, once we leave from here, where it was not just an intellectual discussion, but we want our viewers to be able to take some from the platform, something, especially, I want us to really look at it from the standpoint where we are bringing into context our African roots, because I think that's one thing that's, to a large extent, that is being eroded. We no longer. In fact, he was asking me, because I'll keep referencing him. He was asking me, he said, "Was if we're to look at, let's say, Liberia, he started looking at identity, who we are as a people, what is our culture, that we can then be able to take from to establish our moral values and conduct that we can follow, and then followed by ethics. I just wanted to throw that in. So again, I want to add, like I would usually do, I subdivided the program today into segments. So you just were right on the money with defining what morality and ethics is. And then hopefully we can also look at the African perspective on morality and ethics. So I don't know if you would like to throw some light on that. The fact that, I believe strongly that you did your own research, but like I said, we want to educate our people. So what would be, based on some of your own findings, what's the African perspective on morality and ethics as opposed to the Western world?
So there's a word called Ubuntu.
Yes.
Ubuntu,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that's an African philosophy that emphasizes on interconnectedness,
Yes.
compassion, and community, right? It suggests that individuals are responsible for the well-being of others, and that humanity is inherently connected. And that's always been that concept of the village. You and I remember, vividly growing up, in African society or villages, or even in big cities in Africa, where people stay ahead to customs and laws and moral, right?
Right.
When someone does something within the community, there are certain procedures in way that we follow to bring that person to justice. Where justice in African society at the time was not just based on to be punitive. It was also, a way to send message to those, who may be confused about, what is expected of you as an individual within a society, right? It was addressed by the town chief. It was addressed by the elders, where they will look at the moral, ethical connection of that behavior and how it affects the broader community, right?
Right.
And as such, the individual or the guilty individual was always maybe someone to, follow certain procedures, either returning back whatever they may have taken from the individual or whatever hurt that was inflicted on that individual. There was certain consequences, but it was random. It was those punitive measures, were rendered by the society or the community as a whole, not just as an individual institution, imposing certain punitive measure. So that communal society has always been what have driven African, culture and kept that unity together. Of course, with the infiltrations of Western civilizations, it diluted or, adulterated, a lot of those African moral and custom that have held us tightly together.
Right.
And even us as African who have been educated in the Western education or Western style, we have kind of deviated from those principles. So when it comes to the African setting, it was not based on individualism. It was always based on the community. How does your behavior affect the community? And it's based on that the punishment was designed, or whatever else action needs to be taken, comes out of that.
Right.
So as a conflict with, Western society or Western way of life, we now see that, because we know in the West, individualism is much more prominent than collective whole, right? Individual rights. Now, that doesn't mean that African content does not celebrate or, adhere to individual rights. But, that community, the right of the community comes first before individual. On the other way around, the right of the individual comes first before the community. So I think those are the kind of differences that that comes up when it comes to how we compare, the way we deal with ethics and moral in African society. Because we're not just looking at an individual, or you can do whatever you can because it is your right as an individual. No, but how does your behavior affect the broader community? And it's based on those that decisions are made.
Wow. I like that. It seemed like you went very deep into it, and I think this is something that's to a large extent being eroded, and how we can bring it back. And that was the essence of the show tonight. I was talking to one of my uncles in Liberia, to be specific, and he was, as we had a conversation, I think that was actually the driving force behind why I wanted to bring this topic to the forefront. He's talked about how in Liberia, more there's morality is just far from the community, and why. And we see it in leadership now that you brought to the platform, on Ubuntu, that sense of community. Because back in the day, that was something. Back in the days, that was something that was very, very profound. So, wherein those things just leave, that sense of community, and this whole idea of separating ethics and morality, it didn't just exist. And, I think it was something that normally they live. So my question to you, having said everything that you said about this sense of interconnectedness, that's something that I heard from you. So, like our elders, wearing reading moral philosophy books, they never read those books, but it was just something that they embody. It was a natural phenomenon, because if you look at it from that perspective, then it brings again to the platform, or to the discussion, the Ubuntu philosophy, which is more of the African. I think that philosophy comes from Ethiopia. It was the Ethiopia tradition. I think it says, "I am because we are." That speaks to a shared moral and ethical life. So then my question to you: how do you think Ubuntu shaped our ancestors' sense of responsibility? That particular concept that talks about, because if we, whatever we do, if we base our actions on, like the Bible says, or maybe the Quran says the same thing, you must love your neighbor as yourself. Because morality now talks about right or wrong. So how do you think Ubuntu actually shaped our ancestors' sense of responsibility?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think, for me, when I look at that word and just the meaning behind it, and going back to the historical context of things, African morality often prioritize the well-being of the community over individual desire, emphasizing social responsibility, and duty to others. Many African culture value the wisdoms and experiences of the elder and our ancestors, incorporating their teaching, into ethical guidelines. I think part of the reason that, for those of don't want to say modern, but those of us, young generation, because a lot of norms and actives or stories of African were not things that was written down, right? So they were passed on by words of narrations, through storytelling and so many other forms of, oral communication. So these things was not written down. So as the result, you know, thing got watered down as it moved from generation to generation. So the foundational, piece of those guidance that our ancestor had that pretty much governed the community, for century, kind of just wash away, if not totally, but wash away significantly, that we have not been able to piece those, those moral, ethical, principle that our people, share and executed and exercised, all through generations, right? So at the result, many of us, obviously, we don't speak our languages, right? Or dialects.
Yeah.
So, and if these principle was translated through words of communication or through oral means, well, you don't understand the crew of Val Madingo anymore. So any of those things being passed on through those narrative, if you want to go visit a village and they're speaking Mandingos or Val or Kpelle, whatever, African language, describing those principles, you would not understand it. You won't sync. It won't sync with you because now you're speaking somebody else's language and you're learning their principle of moral and ethic. So now you're coming out to infuse that into, the African culture that you come from. So it just got like confused people, honestly. We just like running helter skelter, like sheep being scared by wolf, and they just running and don't even know their guardian or whoever is leading them, right? That's what I see the problem with many of us and in many African society. So until we can reflect back on, the principal guardians, value the wisdoms and experience and teaching of our elders and try to put that into perspective, and maybe, put it into concrete practice where it become a standard for all of us, because there's nothing new. We don't need to borrow nothing from Europe or America or England or France to guide our moral, ethical ways of doing things, to guide our morality or our ethical way of doing things. No, we don't need that. We already have those principles, right? But again, like I said, because, our language was stolen from us. We were separated through so many different means. We can't connect. So we don't value those things, those wisdom that our ancestors shared, those experiences, the teaching that our ancestors shared. Because honestly, some of them died with those wisdoms. Some of them died with those experiences. It was not written down. So what else do we adhere to? We have to adhere to, the Western, narrative that's been written down for us. And we use that as the standard for African society, which does not always align. So that's where you find the conflict, right? You find the conflict because you're importing culture and behavior into a society that does not understand those things. And I'll give you an example, for example, like the issue of gay, the issue of lesbianism, the issue of abortion and all of that. In Western society, those are individual rights, right? Those are individual ethical or moral issue. For Africa, it's a societal issue. Yes, Jiba, yeah, you want to be there, it's fine. That's you. But how does your behavior affect the larger community? We have to address that. In the Western society, well, society, it's individual right. This is what Jiba want to do. It doesn't affect you in any way. So why care? It's about Jiba right. So I guess that's where the conflict comes in. And I often tell people, like you started the segment, saying that, what may be ethical in certain area may not be the same in certain area. And I use that for civilization, right?
Right.
civilization, as I look at it, it's a normal, acceptable way of life within a given society, right? So what may be civilized for you here may not be civilized, may not, for another person. If I went to China and I got invited to a Chinese family house and they gave me the chopstick for dinner and I'm using fork, do you think that's acceptable to them? Or if I went to a Muslim, a family home where they asked me to take my shoes before walking in the house and I'm walking in there with my shoes, oh, do you think that they consider you as civilized? They might consider you, as uncivilized, right? So the same thing comes with actors when you look at it in some form, So again, we just have to separate the two, when we look at various society and understand that ethics, like I said earlier, uh, it's just simply based on, a set of rules and principles that dictate individual, how individuals should behave in a particular context, while morality, is an acceptable behavior that people expect you to carry on, to be accepted in that society. And that behavior affects the larger society as a whole.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Well, I wanted to stay here for a little bit on this whole concept of interconnectedness, and that is the concept of humanity from Ubuntu, or whatever it's called, which is the communal nature of African society, where individual well-being again is intrinsically linked to a community or community's well-being. So because again, this topic is so broad, to catch it and bring it back into a more unifocal direction, can be kind of tough. So in Liberia, the Kpelle people, which is, they would say, the nation's largest ethnic group, emphasize responsibility and interdependence as well. Their rich oral traditions and ceremonies highlights the importance of community ethics as well. But if we're to take it a step further, because do you think we have a culture, or there's a culture that has been distorted, that is now impacting morality in Liberia? Would you say we have lost our identity, or who we were before, or who we've become? Again, because as I was having this conversation, if you look at Liberia post before the Civil War, so there was a certain group of people, the way we carry ourselves, moral values were a little bit different. So the kids that were born 1990 to 2025, between that time frame, what they see now is what they're practicing. If we can even take it to the leadership, why will, those who are placed in leadership will be the way they are, corruption and all that stuff. There's no more family, tied, children now are parents, parents look up to their children. Decency is not even something that we can lay our hands on. So it almost seems like our cultural heritage has been eroded. So what can you say in that respect?
I think it's a very, very valid concern and observation. Actually, when you look at the content of Liberia, and from when you and I was growing up, what we saw compared to what we see now, I don't by any means default the young generation, because we The principal generation have, failed them miserably. We have failed them miserably, and at the result, because you got to look at it. I mean, you have 14 years of civil war. That's a long time. A lot of these kids were, you know, 7, 4, 5, 6, 8. If a 10-year-old at the time was fighting for 14 years, he's 24 years old. He's an adult already. If an 18 years, I mean, vice versa. So now we broke all the institution that existed at the time. The rebel destroyed many villages and culture. Many people who were in control of head of household either got killed or fled, or were no longer in those positions any longer to provide for the family, which was a normal African expectation or cultural expectation, for individual of head, of household. Now the kids, either by means of poor health or just lack of any opportunity. So the younger generation came out not being guided or led by any moral standard, right? It was free for all. The guy with the bigger gun, the guy that can steal the best, is often admired, right? I mean, you see in Liberia, when someone steals from the government, we say, whoa, that guy's in the Liberian way. That man's smart, man. He used to hit. Look at that house that man built. Look at all the car that man did. Really? You tell me a guy go and rob your house, and you walk by the neighborhood and see that man watching your TV, and you would stand there and say, wow, this guy's smart. He stole my TV. Look at here, his family watching my TV. Think about that for a minute. But because it's the standard, it's what we have shown these kids. So at the end result, most of the kids are astray, right? Many African culture have a strong emphasis on social justice and equality, advocating for fairness and the protection of vulnerable members of society. That's what we have always been. We preach, harmony, right?
Right.
African actors, often aim to create, harmonious and balance, in society, where individuals live in cooperation and respect for one another. These values has been taken away. You talk about interconnectedness, right? African actors, emphasize the interconnectedness of individual and the importance of collective well-being, right? So we still support the individual. If the individual is great at whatever they do, we support them. But how does that individual success tie in with all of us? It still happens today. Like you and I, we do a lot for our people back home. And many of us, once we succeed or ascend to certain, opportunity, we look back at the people that we left behind, right? Because it's a moral obligation. I remember during my early days in America, when Christmas season or July 26th was coming, I'm making lace for people, and my white friends or American friends be like, what's that? I'm saying, I got to send money to all these people. And then be joking at me, wow, you must be really rich. I'm like, no, it's a moral obligation. That when I'm out there, I need to take care of the welfare. It's not like, oh, I arrived, so you on your own, dude. You find a way to get out there. No, it was not that. But now it's different. When you look at what's going on in the country, when all these, I think you and I, talk about it in our last segment, you have individual who, in the whole entire community, they're the only person that have a generator. Everybody else live in the dark, right? They don't care as long as everyone else can look at them as, with certain high esteem, right? The moral is gone. They don't even care about the rest the rest that they left behind, or people whom they have climbed on top to get to the top. So, individualism, versus collectivism is another issue that we have to look at, right?
Right.
Some may perceive conflict between individualism and collectivism in African, society, But these things emphasize communal well-being. It does not necessarily negate individual right over, the freedom. You still have your freedom, but it doesn't mean that, you know, your freedom supersede the community, right? Or the larger society. In the quest for freedom, we don't need to diminish everything else around us. In Western society, you often hear, freedom of right, freedom of this, freedom of that. And in the context of fighting for those freedom, we forget our individual connectedness. And that's why we, continue to emphasize on, the interconnectedness of our people.
Yeah, I like what you just said, and with that, I sometimes wonder, what I mean, is modern morality becoming too individualistic? It's like you said, like I live my truth, someone would say, what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even when that truth steps on someone else, humanity, we really sometimes we don't even care.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with that in mind, and I'd like to ask you this question, and maybe we can even talk about it about morality anymore without sounding like Georgie. We're not Georgian people.
No.
Where do accountability and freedom, find balance?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Where would you say? Because again, then again, we're taking it back to this whole concept of, all right, what Gebah see as being moral, I don't see it as being moral. So I think to a large extent, there's not clarity. But in that context now, how can we help young people who are constantly online? Because I mean, this is more like where they spend a lot of their time reconnect with values that aren't trending on TikTok or maybe Facebook and things like that. How can we help these kids?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an optimist. I don't like to feel defeated, because once you feel defeated, then you stop fighting, you stop caring, and sometimes when you see how deep our culture is so deeply, polluted or corrupt or morally bankrupt, we say morally bankrupt. When you look at it, and then the people in power who's supposed to be the moral leader, at least you will assume or propose, unfortunately do not adhere to these things, or because so many other reasons. They probably don't even have the sense of morality, like you just said. It's kind of diluted. Some people don't even connect those two together, right? I mean, you even look at religion, right? Morality and religion. Some may argue that morality is rooted in religion, but African, morality often emphasize the benefit of values of families, community well-beings, rather than any particular religious doctrine. Before religion was imposed on Africa, we had these things, so it's nothing new, right? But we have just skipped away from these moral value or moral compass that guide us. I think for me with Liberia, I think a serious emphasis need to be made on these social values, right? Our education need to focus on these things, right? Moral and ethics, or belonging to society, social awareness of our own culture, and going back into our own African tradition. These things need to be emphasized. It need to be front and center. Philosophy, right? We skip away from those things. You find many kids go to school today. They want to be maybe tech, engineer, which is nothing wrong with that. They want to be an accountant or they want to be a politician, right? You don't really find a lot of people going into philosophy, sociology, and all these things that help to bring those those value together, right? And like I said to you the other day, yes, I can come to America or Western world, anywhere else, get my Western education, philosophy or whatever degree. But if I do return back home to contribute to the society, we need to flip that around. How can that education actually adapt, the culture, considering the cultural sensitivity of that environment, that place, cultural awareness of that particular, society? How can we incorporate that into our education so that, we are teaching, the value-based education that actually help the people, right? Not some Western, lifestyle that we keep teaching our people. So you find our kids on social media, that's what they're chasing, because we're not teaching them our African value. We're not teaching them the moral, we're not teaching them our African value. We're not teaching them our African moral. We're not teaching them our history in any sense. We're teaching them about this is the Western lifestyle. This is individual freedom. You can go on social media and do this and do that. So the kids are driven towards that. We're doing them a disservice. We don't have the kind of structure to bring back our African roots, our, ethical value, based on the sense of Africa or based on the moral needs of Africa. So if we can provide the outlet for them to learn, they're going to find other outlet. And of course, the advent of technology and social media, have taken over and have reached many across the globe than the speed of lightning. Actually, when you look at it, a mother in the village anywhere, or an African lady in villages that you can't even reach by car, got cell phone, have access to digital media or something, right? So that's what they see. They don't see us. They don't see you and I talking about these things and emphasizing these things and bringing the root to these things and and connecting it to our society, how it affects us today and what we need to do differently. So we allow the TikTok to take over. We allow the Facebook, we allow the Instagram, we allow all these different channels, to take over our young people. So that's what they're going to ascribe to, because that's what they see. What's your alternative? You don't have none. You don't have school that teach these values. You have teacher that doesn't even know these values themselves. So how are they going to teach it to our young people? So to answer your question, what can we do for them? Or what do I think that is going wrong? I honestly can't believe that, because you have to give someone an alternative first, right? If I tell you start smoking and you addict, with smoking, I have to give you an alternative. I have to give you other options, whether it's CPAD or maybe, putting you on some kind of a gum to eat, that would kind of kill that desire or that yawning desire for smoking. I have to give you an alternative. If I don't give you an alternative, I can't tell you what you're doing is not good. Then what next? Because you don't have nothing else to provide me.
Now that you're saying that, something come to mind. And I think, like I said, I try to get this thing into segment. So it almost seems like we're still rooted in our tradition. And what's the tradition? Now I'll go back to the same Kpelle for Liberia now. I know we going back, bouncing back and forth with old Africa. We'll look at Liberia, especially in Africa, especially the Kpelle people. What were some of the traditional ways, just like you said, they taught ethics and morality without needing the classroom? Because, a lot of the education our people were getting even before the advent or the introduction of Western education was not conventional, outside. Maybe the people, we'll kind of get to it shortly, the poorest society, descending group.
Yeah, the poorest society and the sandy society. Yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff
But,
is now becoming extinct.
oh, yeah. It's becoming extinct. Absolutely. It's becoming extinct. Again, it talks about, just like I said, not to, interrupt you there, but again, they talk about how the Civil War, destroy all these framework that we have, all of these cultural barriers or boundaries that we have, right? For these people have died away because, a lot of our tradition and history was translated through oral means. It's not written anywhere. I mean, I was struggling at some point, doing a project where, was trying to, because I used to read to my kids all the time, before they go to sleep. And it was this time that I really was tired. They didn't want to read, just wanted to tell them a story. And I happened to talk about some, childhood African story. To my surprise, my kids were amazed. That's the only thing they wanted to hear. The next day I went to go read and said, no, Daddy, tell us some more African story. And it became the routine. But then I ran out. I had nothing left. Then, my memory was depleted. So I reached out to, folks in Africa, just telling them. The idea came to me, why if we do collection of African story, all these old stories that our parents told us, our family, uncle, grandfather told us near the fire heart, and write them down so that I can publish it, on the internet where people can have access to these things. And I started reaching out to family and people were like, oh yeah, I remember that story. This person said, damn man, oh, I don't remember all the detail anymore. Oh, this old person, yeah, used to tell this story, but he died. So a lot of people die along with these stories, die, along with these moral, ethical value that they have that they instill in us or that was instilled in them. They didn't live enough to, share some of those things with us, right? For us now to have the opportunity to be able to write these things down, right? So that it become a guiding principle. I mean, you look at like today, when we design an organization, right? We come up with bylaw and constitution that guide how that, organization should function, right? But it's a tough process. It just need to be written down on paper so it become a bounding, document that everyone generation after me will always see it, right? But if we just do more, oral communication, if I tell you you only remember it, well, it only depends on your memory. But we all know as we get older, our memory, our memories start to fade us, right? So at the end result, you have nothing left to give to the younger people, that coming after you because your memory is not that sharp anymore, right? So until we can go back to these things, to be able to, put these things together in a way that it can become, institutionalized where we can actually teach these things, right? In schools I would say start from elementary, honestly, start from elementary all the way to the college level. We can develop it in a way that reflect our people. It's sad to see that the Sanders Bush is disappearing. It's sad to see that the poor society is disappearing. Those things those society. I remember, growing up, we used to see those people coming out of that. It was so tight knit society. They didn't tell you what was happening there, but they didn't write it on anything for us to see what was actually happening there, so that we can know and carry it on. Right? It was tight knit. So all of those things affected us, and as the result, there was nothing to pass on to the next generation because the memory of those people faded away and they die along with it. So there was nothing to teach them. So what then happened? African, so what then happened? Western education Western way of life, Western morality, Western ethics fill in the gap. African ethics, to a broader extent, face challenges, in navigating, the complex ethical dilemmas that particularly, when you look at it in the modern context or the globalization, context. We face a moral dilemma. How do we bring African context or African moral content or ethical content to align with, modernization and globalization? So we got a lot of work to do, honestly. And with the young generation that we have currently now, most of the individuals that are leading, particularly in the country of Liberia, we don't really see a lot of these people exhibiting anything of ethical value at all.
Right.
They have become individualized in their quest for wealth, in the quest for power, in the quest for material gains. They have pretty much stumbled upon anything you call ethics, morally bankrupt, morally corrupt, ethically depleted, morally depleted. They have nothing to teach the young generation. So I don't know. I fear for the future of our young people, honestly. I fear for it.
Wow. You said it all. I have some questions as I wanted to ask you, but it seemed like you pretty much walked right into some of the questions I wanted to ask, because that was for the next segment that I set up. We talked about losing and reclaiming our heritage. Let me ask you one question there before we can transition to our last segment, because we're trying to find a way forward. That we to allow, just like you said. Now, I was saying that before, where if you go to Liberia right now, the average kid in the interior is speaking English, and I think the Westerners succeeded to an extent, because where they gave us, all their institutions, their schools, their way of life is what we have accepted, and now become more acceptable and dominant. That our indigenous culture and traditional way of life, moral values, we're trying to find a way now to get it back. So how do we actually reclaim our indigenous moral value and ethics? How do we bring them back? So that'll bring me to a question that I have here as we transition to our last segment. How do we hold, as a people, how do we hold space for critique and respect at the same time? Or to be able, because sometimes you try to criticize, and then it's very constructive where we say, no, this is not how we do it, because now we've become modernized and westernized, that we say, and someone would say, that thing is outdated, we don't do it no more. That was every female. Now, some people, when you're talking about, there's certain things you're trying to bring into the conversation, will say, you still doing that? You're still talking that talk? This, because now we've gravitated to, and it has to do with identity, though, because we've lost our true identity of who we are. If you were to go to places like Ghana, they still hold that culture and the tradition.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
From Africa,
absolutely.
Why is that happening? You know what I mean? So we're looking at the context of life, and maybe the reason why, we as Liberians find ourselves in this situation. Again, I'll go back. I continue to use my boy as a reference, because we have these really thought-provoking conversation behind the scene. Has to do with the fact that Liberia was one of the countries that was never colonized. And then you had the way the country was established, founded, how to get independence. You have people coming from all over the place. So there's no true identity and culture maybe the ones that the indigenous had there, but because of the way the country was established, our indigenous culture that was there now to allow us to be almost seem like people started to frown on it, like, and were trying to integrate themselves into the new world that you
absolutely.
understand? So that it now has become a problem. You see some people say, "Oh my man, you countryman, other man are Congo man." So you want to dress like that guy, you want to act like that. So you picked up all of that now sooner or later. So we're all confused.
Yeah. It's funny that you said that because you know, that's one part. It's part of my book, America Forgotten Star Liberia. I mean, there's few chapters in there that I emphasize on that particular topic you just raised. You know, for a very long time, Toba, Totman was actually the first African that president that actually wore traditional suit, right? In order to align with the native people of Liberia. For a very long time, Liberian didn't wear country clothes, something we call country clothes, right? Because they felt like you wear country clothes, you were demeaning, you were of a lower class, uneducated, uncivilized, untamed, right?
Yeah.
But until they started traveling to places like Nigeria and other African countries and started seeing professors, seeing doctors, seeing ministers wearing traditional African clothes, before Liberian, slowly started to adopt those things. But it became very rampant just recently after the Civil War, when many Liberian fled the country, right? That's when we really embrace other African culture. I tell people, I say, you can see a Nigerian, a Ghanaian, Senegalese, any of these people, you can identify who they are by just looking at them. Liberia is hard because we lost, right? Like it's correctly stated. Our culture, was diluted when the Black American, settler came in. And one thing that I emphasized in the book was that if Black American would have been at the time, right, was very smart to incorporate Liberian traditional culture along with their Western culture that they have, imported from here, and merge those two together and bring value proposition in both, Liberia would have been a different nation today. But they did a great job for almost 150. Many Liberians don't even know. For 150 years, you and I were not considered Liberian. Native Liberian were not considered citizens of the Republic of Liberia based on the Constitution. Voting in Liberia those days, you needed to own land. And many Liberians didn't own their land because land was not sold to the native people, right? It was Topman who came and eradicated that. You see, the Baso people, they're mostly one of the original people of the land,
right.
So what Taba did to compensate for that, he began to create inroad into the interior of Liberia. From Monrovia was just it. It was the country. But yet, you still used to have tax collector who, the native people were told them in Hammonds, take them into the village to collect taxes from the people. But that was it. It was the same thing we call here, government representation. I forget the saying, but taxation without representation. Right? Taxation without representation. You collect taxes from the native people and bring it to Monrovia, which was the country. Right? But it was Todman who, when he took over, he was able to create at least a 45 miles from Monrovia into the interland, which is not, by comparison, what Liberia is, 45 miles from Monrovia into the hinterland. You're talking probably like Bombing, Clay, Ashland. That's why you have these little Congo settlements in those areas, because of how far, those people were allowed. That was the limit of the people who were allowed to be considered part of Liberia, right? And Topman was able to turn that around. The Bassa people were given a huge plot of land. That's why Bassa people own a lot of land in Liberia. A huge plot of land so that they could allow them to be able to vote. But yesterday, under the Constitution of Liberia, they were not citizens. You, your father, my father, and all those grandparents of ours, we were not citizens of Liberia till Samuel Doe, till the 1980 when the Constitution, changed. The revised Constitution allowed, eradicated that, right? So the Black American settler never incorporated the native Liberian into their mainstream. And to be successful within the mainstream of Liberia, you needed to be part of that culture, that Black American culture. So people with change their name just to fit in, because if your name was Yakpawolo or Kali, man, you ain't getting no job. There was no opportunity for you. You're a countryman's son. No one want to touch you. So you have to change your name to, sorry, I got to put you on the scene here. You got to change your name to Uri. You got to change it to Williams. You got to change your name to Johnson, to Anderson. Those are the names that was accepted. Not, Yapwa Wuro, Koli, or Bobo, or those names that we're hearing right now. It's not. So we have shown. So our culture from the get-go was shown upon. It was not to be accepted. It was not to be appreciated at all. So those of us who grew up in that era, we lean more towards what we call the so-called Congo, right? And, I don't know many people even understand the word Congo, where it actually, came from. It was just simply individual who, were being exploited from, Congo, Brazzaville, and being brought into the New World that got intercepted, on the oceans and was, resettled in that area. Because when slavery was banned, America was still carrying on, slave trade for over 50 years after slavery was banned by Great Britain, France, and even America. But they were still corrupt, individual within the system and the government itself, because remember, it was a tax base for America, right? Cotton was the biggest industry, and who were planting those cottons was slaves. So why would America actually step on its own economic prosperity? No, it wouldn't. So it turned a blind eyes on the illegal slave trade. But it was the British who intercepted, those people along with the French Navy, right? So they look around the proximity of the area that they were, captured. They look around. The only organized system or country that was there at the time was Liberia. So, we already have settlers here. So let's bring these people and settle them among, the settler here in Liberia. So the Congo people came and settled, which was Congo Brazzaville, brought them and settled them among the Black American. Now, because the Black American, at first, they were terrorized by the native people, because the native people terrorized them. They didn't just give up their land, and went to sleep. They terrorized them. They have to defend themselves in any way. And of course, the desire to settle in Africa was not going well for many, because news of people being killed, people dying of malaria and diseases and all of that stir and the struggle, many other Black Americans or Black folks who were yearning for that, desire to settle in Liberia, kind of like say, oh no, I don't think this is a place that we want to go at the time. So they needed population. So the new arriver, who was the Congo people, was perfect, but they used those people to be their servants, but of course, population made numbers. So as those people integrate with them, they change their name. Of course, they couldn't sound, these African names, because they came from different part of Congo. They all didn't speak the same language, like many African countries. We all don't speak the same language. So in order to communicate with these people or know them by name, so each family, if I was the Uri family that took 3 Congo people, I gave them their name. They take care of my name, right? If I were Kamara, they would take my name. So as a result, those people slowly integrated, and they were able to send those people to school, and that's how they got educated. So of course, when the Black American original settlers, start to escape and then intermarry between those two groups became the norm. So as a result, you couldn't differentiate again, who actually was Congo people, who actually was Black American, or descendant, because they have integrated over time. So those people themselves, became the ruling class of Liberia. So they themselves never even considered themselves African at all. Again, because get it, they never considered themselves African. So the native people were still not welcome. That's why you ought to have other African that have integrated. So the Liberian native we have had it a rough way, honestly. We have never had a path, to prosperity in Liberia. So it is very unfortunate, and I write in the book that, which is a different segment we can talk about, but just kind of like diving into a little historical context here. It behooves me that, Samuel Doe has the perfect opportunity for the first time for the native people to have come together as a collective to move that country forward, But of course, when he got there, miseducated, misinformed, he just brought division among the people and kept separating them more. So we never really come together as native people to find our identity, to find our identity, to be proud of, to embrace and be proud of, and to use to propagate to our young generation. We keep striving for this Congo or so-called Western way of life. And right now we just like way off the cliff. We're way off the cliff. And there's no foundation that is set in place to bring us back to that original, people that we were. So I don't know. We got a long way to do. I don't know what advice I can really give other than, platform like this, talking about these things. A lot of these stories, man, I tell you, people don't know these things. People don't know these. That's why we got to go back to the historical content to connect the root, because all people don't know.
Right.
We never have outlet like this. People would rather listen to some white dude talking about some, dumb shit about Africa than listen to it, than listen to me and you trying to bring context to, shine light on issue that bothers us and how we can collectively understand, the root causes of our problem, and how can we come together, to find means. It's you and I in these platforms, along with other like-minded people, that can continue to emphasize, the importance of these things and tie the, historical, a connection to it, and hopefully find a solution through dialogue.
Yes.
But it all starts with education, and there's no emphasis on those areas right now in Liberia. People don't even care about those things, honestly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jiba. That was a power pack. So if you have just tuned in, and our topic for tonight, morality versus ethics, untangling. We see, as you can see on the screen, the topics right there. Untangling the code we live by in a conflicting world, and it's a fact. Live in a world where we're so confused. But one thing that is really true to us, as a platform grounded in justice, integrity, and transformation, understanding this distinction empowers our listeners to navigate difficult conversations. These are conversations that we're not having. We can challenge systemic norms. We can redefine our inner compass. It's not just about being good. It's about knowing why, we choose what's right. Mm-hmm. And so, we will continue to have these conversations. Mr. Jiba, we're getting close to our program here to conclude with. I'd like you now to give us your closing remark just before we close here. We've had an incredible time with you. I want to thank you for coming to grace us. I think we need more from you because it seems like you have a lot of information. I don't know. This is a pretty difficult topic to discuss.
Mm-hmm. It
Uh,
is. It
you
is
know,
very difficult. You know.
to try to narrowing on for a country. I know we'll get to Africa, but for Liberia,
Mm-hmm.
a
Yeah.
country where we're not deeply rooted in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
We
We're
were
not.
found on culture divide.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of the things that we inherited in many, not even inherited in a manner where, oh yeah, we were taught, but
Mm-hmm.
we copied. So nothing is really authentic regional. And this is why we're struggling. Was a question that my compatriot asked today. He said, "Well, what's our identity? What's our true culture? Because how will we migrate from what we have, our indigenous culture, to
Yeah.
try to grapple with something that someone stole from or took from the slave master, from the masters?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Who
Mm-hmm.
humiliated them, who decimated them, you know what I mean, desecrated them,
Mm-hmm.
annihilated them. You know what I mean? All that stuff, oppressed them. But this
Mm-hmm.
is what we took, and we say we established ourselves as a
Mm-hmm.
country. So this is a conflicting world that we're living in. But all is not lost because I know there's a way around it, you know what I mean, where we'll be able to reclaim somewhat. You know, I mean, someone will ask the question. If you say we're not even established on that foundation where we were grounded to a culture, then how do we reclaim? So the issue of morality and ethics in Liberia is difficult, and that's why the last time I think you were on the show the very first time, I said it takes a village to raise a child, but if the village is crazy, the village will produce crazy children. And
Mm-hmm.
this
Yep.
topic of
That's what's going on right now.
yeah, so it's a crazy village. You think that
Yep.
people salivating over Liberia being elected to the UN General Council, whatever it's called. Why would we celebrate that? How would that impact? I mean, we're now more about how it's going to benefit us collectively as a nation. What good
Mm-hmm.
is it going to do for us?
Yeah.
Because few people will be used as puppet, you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? For something little in the pocket. You'll be somewhere as a symbol, but not to be influential. And you are jumping all over the place. How can a country like DRC, in fact, where you have chaos, you know what I mean? How we
Yeah.
being used? And then Liberia to follow, and someone say, "Oh yeah, 1964." You know what I mean? We're regaining our confidence in our place on the map. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. But just to go back to the topic, morality versus ethics, I think, and again, like I said, it's a very deep topic, because if we're to look at it from the context where we're talking about law, we're talking about medicine, what I mean, ethics in even engineering, civil engineering. I know we have our own fundamental core principles that we follow. So it's a pretty deep topic to unpack, but you did extremely well. You come as a professor, what I mean, and we like how you bring those rich resources that we can use to reflect on. So please give us a closing remark, and then we will jump right into closing the program for tonight. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, brother, all is not yet bleak. Yes, when you look at you know, the tremendous challenges that we have, sometimes you see a roadblock. You really don't see a way out of it, especially when there's no national movement around it and people in power who's supposed to be the catalyst to lead us to these roles. When you watch, social media and you see people in the House of Chamber in Liberia, I mean, literally arguing, and you wonder how the hell did these people even got elected to be over there. It's not arguing about anything that really benefit or change the country. Most often it's always about themselves, and how they can continue to amass more power, or how they can continue to amass more resources of the country, right? You don't see people arguing for free compulsory education, which is something that I feel is way long overdue, way long overdue. Free compulsory education for every Liberian. That should be a moral obligation for all of us, just because the country has been bankrupt, the country has been corrupted, the country has been depleted by so many means that we just discovered, that we just discussed in the segment. What is the arrival of the free Black American settler, what is the Liberian Civil War, what is the rampant corruption that have stolen away resources that have not been able to be allocated in educational institutions or moral institutions to help propagate Liberia or put Liberia on the map, or the citizens on the map in any way. So it is a moral obligation for now, as we say, this new generations of leader to focus on these things. You don't hear those kind of arguments, but like you said, all is not lost. I still believe that, African ethics, can contribute to decolonizing, contemporary ethical framework, that challenging the dominant Western perspective. We can still do that. And I hope that, through these programs and many such, we can continue to shine the light, and hopefully, we can, move other individuals to, especially the people in power, to start thinking differently, that, it is not about, what my country can do for me, but what can you really do for your country? That as a citizen, a citizen is the title, but every title has a responsibility. And what is your responsibility to your country? Those are the questions we need to be asking. You don't just become citizen by paper. It's a title. You have an obligation. You have a responsibility. Yeah, as much as the country has a responsibility to you, to protect you, to safeguard your life, provide security and opportunity, you as a citizen also have an opportunity. For those in power, I think that question, is mostly directed at them, because they have the wheels of power and the keys to, to the economic resources that will help to, enhance life and change the perspective and mindset of our people. So we will continue to do this, and hopefully, we can transcend,
Yes.
minds. So thank you for the show again, as always, and I look forward to, joining you on our next segment.
It was a great show, man. And I would like to take this time to just send a shout out to followers, a few followers, Mecca Squad. I see here we have Nathaniel Heron actually restated the topic, and then he went ahead and he gave his own the way he see morality versus he says ethics. He says I look at morality and ethics from the prison of philosophy as a call to duty and adhering to universal law. Then it brings me to let me see what he says here. Kantianism, categorical imperative. So that's how he concluded. And then we also have, I was hoping that he was going to join us. He's one of our panelists, and also Ms. Doku. but unfortunately, they too did not make it. But for those of you who are watching, I think this is a thought-provoking topic. We will take a deep dive into it, to ask some of the questions. Can someone be moral, ethical, or vice versa? How cultural, religion, and political influence both ethics and, in institution, law, medicine, business versus individual moral values, real world conflicts, whistleblowing, civil disobedience, cancel culture, So why society still struggle with these distinctions more than ever before? Can you imagine? We were poor back then, but we were happy. So right now, people don't care, and that's why we're talking about being able to have a whole class on morality, on decency, on integrity, accountability. You know what I mean? All those things we need to talk about. Again, before we go, I want to actually leave everyone with one of my favorite proverbs. It says, when the roots are deep, there's no reason to fear the wind. We've been through the storm already. We've been through these storms many times, but our roots, they're ancient, they are sacred, they are still holding us up. So until next time, family, stay rooted, stay connected, and stay proud. This is the We to Our Libraries movement. I've been your host, as usual, Ayiti Williams. And with us, we have Mr. Gebah. We say have a good night, and we look forward to another episode, hopefully tomorrow. Please join us with another exciting topic. And have a good night. God bless.
Thank you, brother. God bless.
Thank you.
Simple life. It's all we want to live. Give me food, give me clothes, give me love, and give me shelter.